kick off with Dr. Paul Nodengen's introduction. I will then summarize the RTMS requirements. Paul will introduce the PBS pilot project, after which I'll talk about the rules, and Paul will then talk through the PBS application process. And in the course of that session, he will also provide an update of the current status of the project and what the outlook is for the future. You're most welcome to log any questions you might have during the course of the session on the chat, and we will gladly discuss those at the end of each session, or at the end of the session around 11:40 or so. So we look forward to a good session, and thank you again for joining. And we hope you will find it informative, meaningful, and you will take something back into your respective workplaces. So Paul, thank you again for always presenting, and we appreciate your willingness to share your information and knowledge. For those of you who don't know Paul, which can't be too many, Paul chairs both the RTMS National Steering Committee and the PBS committee as well. He's been around for, I think, 40 years in the road transport sector. He's had various positions in the industry, and he's one of the foremost experts in terms of road transport in the world. So we're very privileged to have you, Paul. Welcome, and thank you again.
Thanks very much, Oliver, and good morning, everyone. It's always good to be involved in one of these sessions.
Sorry, I think you're on mute. We can't hear you.
We can hear Paul.
Can you hear me now?
No, nothing, Paul. No audio on our side.
We can hear.
It shows you're not on mute, but for some reason we can't hear you.
I can hear the sound coming
Still
through.
nothing, no.
No, someone can hear.
Yes,
nothing at all.
I can
I
hear
can see your lips moving though.
No, there are, Oliver, there are
sorry.
people that can hear.
Okay, so Tion said okay, it's on my side, Paul, my apologies. Problem with them. Okay, please go ahead. It's on my side.
Okay, I'm just going to try and share. Window. The same thing happened. Same thing happened last time. So just hang on a second. Right, can you see my screen?
Yes, Paul, you're on.
Okay, and can you hear me, Oliver?
Loud and clear. It was on my side. Apologies for that.
Yeah, it helps. It helps if you turn your volume up. Right. Okay, so well, thanks very much. I'm just going to give an introduction to the RTMS, and then after that we'll be moving, well, after Oliver's presentation, we'll be moving on to the performance-based standards project. So, you know, it started off as a project originally in 2003 to address overload control and protect the road network, but it's become a project that focuses on safety and sustainability, primarily for heavy vehicles, including buses on the road network. And the sustainability extends not only to protecting the road network, in other words, having a sustainable road network, which is very important for any operator run a profitable and efficient business. But also we found that it's a good tool for ensuring sustainability of SMME operators who may not have the knowledge or experience of running a fleet of heavy vehicles. So the RTMS and its requirements provides a very good tool to make sure that a small company that's starting out in the transport business puts the correct foundation blocks in place so that they don't go under or become insolvent after a few years, but rather grow and become a sustainable business. So the National Overload Control Strategy for the National Department of Transport that I was involved in when I was at the CSIR, one of the recommendations was to look at self-regulation as a way of complementing law enforcement because of all the constraints that we see with law enforcement on our roads. It was an additional recommendation to say, let's have a look to see if we can't promote self-regulation and a greater responsibility by operators and consignees and consignors to ensure safety and sustainability on the road network. So if you look at the three key elements in road freight transport, you've got the road infrastructure, very important. You've got the vehicles and you've got the drivers. And the original project when we started in 2003 was focusing on the road infrastructure, but we found that the issues around vehicles, in particular maintenance and vehicle operations like speeding, route risk assessment, and very much in particular driver skill, driver health, and managing driver fatigue have been very important areas of the RTMS initiative. So really it's about managing risk. If you talk to the insurance industry, if you talk to the finance sector, one of their biggest concerns is to what extent does a company manage risk? It's also about promoting compliance in terms of the National Road Traffic Act, but also very importantly, improving or increasing productivity. So operators want to see an improved bottom line. It's difficult, and we've seen it in our ISO involvement in the ISO standard 39001 to purely promote safety. If you can tie it in with improving productivity, then it becomes a lot more attractive for operators. So the reality is that on our roads, we have a large number of crashes involving heavy vehicles, but in general, a very high number of crashes, which have a negative impact on lives, on the products that are being moved and the trucks, as well as the efficiency of the road network because of increased congestion when you have road closures. And then on the road side, which was the original intention of the what it was called load accreditation program, is to protect and to preserve the road network. If roads are allowed to deteriorate to this extent, it becomes very costly to rehabilitate, the order of 18 times more than if you maintain the roads. Part of the problem is the fact that the road authorities are not maintaining their roads at the correct time. So the periodic maintenance is essential. If you don't do your periodic maintenance, which is a relatively low cost, then your eventual costs become very high, but overloading of heavy vehicles does contribute to that. Over the weekend, I returned from Hermanus via road, and there's a lot of periodic maintenance being done at the moment with lots of stop-goes, which is irritating to road users, but at least it means that the authorities are doing the periodic maintenance, which is normally a light treatment. It's very quick, so the lane closures are not very long, but when they have to start doing rehabilitation, like these roads that you can see in these photos, the lane closures are much, much longer because they've got to remove all the layers underneath, reconstruct the layers, and then do the asphalt paving on top. So the periodic maintenance is very important. Some research that was done a few years ago by CSIR and University of Pretoria shows that operating heavy vehicles on a good road versus a bad road has got significant cost implications. This is now just in terms of maintenance and repair costs to the vehicle. It doesn't take into account increased fuel consumption, increased travel time, and also potential damage to the goods that are being transported. But you can see these were vehicles that were operating on different categories of roads, and there's a more than 120% increase in vehicle maintenance and repair costs. I've also been involved in what's called a brake and tire watch. Some of you may have heard of it. It's been going since 2006. Almost 50 events have been held. It's a 2-day training course for traffic officers. There could be anything from 50 to 150 traffic officers that attend. And the first day is theoretical lectures in a lecture room by industry experts, particularly focusing on brakes and tires, but also fifth wheels and other components, the importance of maintenance of those components of a truck. And then day 2 is a practical where the whole team goes to a vehicle testing center and trucks are pulled in and inspected. The officers are divided into groups. But the scary thing is that of all the trucks that have been inspected in all these training courses, 69% on average have been discontinued from use. So it's clear that on our roads, we have high levels of non-compliance in terms of vehicle fitness. Never mind overloading and speeding and driver hours. Those are other things. This is just focusing on the vehicle fitness. So you'll get, on the left, you can see a brake lining that's in contact with the drum. That's what it should look like. And then on the right, you can see big gaps between the lining and the brake drum, which means that there's no braking on that wheel. And in many cases, the shoe has been completely removed, or the lining is gone, or even the brake booster is missing. There's some shocking trucks and trailers on the road that are providing or causing a big safety risk to other users. Tires also extremely important. Managing tire inflation, tire tread depth, etc. The poor tires or tire failure is a large a project that I was involved in some years ago called Moving Freight with Better Trucks was looking at crash statistics in various countries, and you can see South Africa had a crash rate then of about 10 fatal crashes per 100 million kilometers, compared with the other countries that were involved in the project, much lower. Switzerland running at about 1 fatal crash per 100 million kilometers. I also pulled up some statistics of just fatal crashes in South Africa, not specifically heavy vehicle crashes, but you can see the graph on the left, which is fatalities over the last from 2000, and it's there's been no real improvement. It's just consistent. And if you calculate that, in South Africa in 2012 we had 230 fatalities per million people, and in 2022 it went down to 206. So there has been a 10% decrease. Obviously the population is growing. So we're sitting at about 206 fatalities per million people. The graph on the right shows fatalities per million in other, primarily European countries. So Sweden, that I referred to just now, Sweden is 18 fatalities per million people. The maximum on this graph, Romania here, is 93 per million people. But a large number of countries are below 100. And we're sitting at 206. So we're way above international norms. This was some fatalities from 2 countries. I attended an ISO meeting in December. Oliver was also there. So in Sweden, they have, as I mentioned, 18 road fatalities per million population. And they're sitting at about 200 fatalities per year. And they've got goals to reduce it over the next number of years. So that's where they're sitting at 200 fatalities per year. We're sitting at 14,000 fatalities per year. And then on the right is Japan. You can see in there from 2012 to 2022, they managed to reduce their fatalities by almost 50%, which is the goal. The United Nations Decade of Action for Road Safety is to reduce fatalities by 50% over a decade. But in South Africa, we're not really making much headway. Some countries have gone to some measures to try and reduce speed, because speed is a big cause of crashes. So in Denmark, they tried this a few years ago, and in fact, it actually had a very positive effect on speeding. I don't know if we would want to try it here in South Africa. This is Town Hill in Pietermaritzburg, and you see when there's a crash, the light motor vehicles are diverted onto the alternative route, but the trucks have to stand. So if your truck's there, you can be a good operator or a poor operator. Your truck's going to be stuck there, wasting diesel and wasting time. So it's one of the objectives of the RTMS is to get better compliance and reduce crashes throughout the country. Because if we can do that, it benefits everyone. It benefits all the road users if we can reduce the number of crashes and the number of lane closures for unnecessary hours. So the RTMS, which Oliver will cover, and I'm not going to go into much detail, but it's a voluntary system. It's industry-led, government-supported. It's focusing on consignors, consignees, and road transport operators to implement a management system standard similar to ISO 9000 or 14000, and with outcomes that contribute to preserving road infrastructure, improving road safety, and improving productivity. So that's the goal: safety, productivity, compliance. And there's these pillars which categorize all the elements in the standard which need to be addressed by an operator that wants to become certified. And Oliver will go into that in more detail. It's also been published as an African standard in 2021, ARS 1371, and that African standard is largely based on the South African standard, but it also includes issues around crossing borders. So border posts, the idea is that RTMS companies could have a green lane that they would be able to go through the border posts faster. The Cross-Border Road Transport Agency in South Africa is working on that, but there hasn't been much progress to date. So I just want to show some positive outcomes of the RTMS, some companies that have implemented it. It started in the forestry industry where at the time in 2002, more than 30% of the trucks transporting timber to the pulp and paper mills, that's essentially in Mpumalanga and KwaZulu-Natal, were overloaded, more than 30%. And that's weighing the vehicles at the destination, at the mills where they offload the timber. So they set a target of 4%, which, as you can see, is that horizontal line there. And you could see how the overloading came down. And then at the beginning of 2015, the Forestry RTMS Committee, which is primarily industry, they reduced their target to 1%. And you can see since the beginning of 2015, they've managed to keep their overloading in the forestry industry to around 1%, which is a massive improvement considering it was at 30%. And the similar trend has been seen in the sugar industry, also KZN and in Mpumalanga, where the overloading was also above 30%, and it's now been managed to maintain below 1%. And the average payload, which is the red line there, has actually initially dropped a bit, but it's actually higher now than what it was when the project started, which is largely due to managing not only overloading, but underloading. And they use onboard load cells because loading in the field, there's no weigh bridges. They use onboard load cells to optimize the payload for each trip. Okay, so there's just a couple of slides showing examples from a few different organizations. This is City of Cape Town. When they started with their RTMS journey, only just over 50% of their vehicles were being serviced on time. That's was about 900 vehicles, mostly LDVs. And you can see over a 10-year period, their fuel consumption reduced by 24%. And that was attributed to better servicing of vehicles and better driver training. So controlling speeding, harsh acceleration, harsh braking. So if you can reduce your fuel consumption by more than 15%, there you can see massive savings if you've got a large fleet. And that's where the productivity aspect comes in. Here's an example from Pendula BDM where they reduced their speeding over a period of time. OneLogix, their vehicle delivery services, the blue bars represents the number of kilometers traveled per year. So in 2022, it was 37, what? I don't want to be like Jacob Zuma, 37.4 million kilometers. But the red line represents their crashes. So in 2016, they had 126 crashes. And in 2022, it was down to 9, which again is a massive improvement. And this just shows the average crash rate per month, where the red line is 2016, 2017, 2018, and the dark blue line at the bottom is 2022. So you can see how they've managed to bring down their crash rate considerably, which again would have a positive impact on their bottom line. Jabula Plant Hire, the left-hand graph showing reduction in road crashes, and the right-hand graph showing improvement in fleet availability and a reduction in downtime. So these are the kind of things that one needs to monitor if you become RTMS certified. You've got to monitor loading, speeding, crashes, fines, servicing of vehicles. And where there's an area that's not good, you would expect to see an improvement over time. You're not going to fix the problem in 6 months or so. It might take a few years, but we've seen a lot of examples of quite significant improvements. Dawn Logistics, they started in 2013 with 218 fines. You can see the reduction in crashes, about almost 50% reduction in crashes, a huge reduction in crashes due to driver error from 19 to 5, and also a reduction in breakdowns. And then they measured a 23% improvement in fuel consumption, again, mainly influenced by good maintenance processes and improved driver behavior. And here you can see their speeding statistics from their telematics system. In 2014, there were 60,000 speeding events, which worked out to about 300 speeding events per truck per year. And in 2017, it was down to less than 5,000, or 19 events per truck per year. And that basically represents a big reduction in risk. So the probability of crashes would come down significantly. There's also been a number of qualitative benefits that have been observed by various companies in terms of turnover of drivers, standard of living of drivers, improved driver wellness, reduction in absenteeism, etc. And just generally improved driver behavior and motivation of employees by just having a system in place that really takes care of all the staff, especially the drivers. These are some of the latest statistics in terms of the RTMS. I think this is the end of November last year. We had 362 certified fleets or depots, and you can see the graph on the top right, how the growth has been since 2007. And there was a bit of a dip with COVID in 2020, but since 2020, there's been quite a steep increase in the number of certified companies. And we also just break it down in terms of fleet size. So the graph on the left shows there are 66 companies that are certified with fleets of between 1 and 5 trucks, 50, 6 to 10 trucks, 61, 11 to 20 trucks, etc. And the biggest growth in the last 5 years has been with the smaller operators. So there have been a lot of SMME companies that have become certified, some because they want to operate PBS vehicles, so that's a requirement. And also there's been a drive by some of the consignors, like the mining companies, and Eskom, and obviously Sappi and Mondi, that their transport contractors should become RTMS certified. Again, it's them taking responsibility for the manner in which their goods are transported. And then the graph on the right shows the number of new companies in 2021, 2022, and 2023. Increase in number of motorized vehicles. So last year, there were over 2,000 new motorized vehicles that became part of certified fleets. So sort of in conclusion, I'm convinced that more than 50% of heavy vehicles on the road are not compliant, whether it's through as a result of vehicle fitness or overloading or speeding or driver hours. You know, if you add that all together, it's definitely more than 50% not compliant. And we also know that law enforcement has a very small impact on trucks, to a slightly greater extent on overloading with the weighbridges. But we also know that there are a lot of routes where there's no law enforcement for loading. And then, of course, vehicle fitness is hardly enforced throughout the country. And the objective of the RTMS is to complement law enforcement and to try and move that vertical line more to the right, so that as time progresses, we have more and more heavy vehicles on the road that are compliant, which again will have positive impacts in terms of productivity for the individual fleets, but also for all road users. If we can reduce the number of crashes on our roads, all the road users benefit. So I would say that the biggest impacts of the RTMS have been in terms of driver training, controlling speeding, which has an impact on rollover and braking distance, fatigue, managing driver hours, overloading, as you have seen, and then just better vehicle servicing and maintenance. I'd say those are the 5 areas that have had the biggest impact on fleets that have become RTMS certified. So, yeah, we want to reduce overloads to preserve our road networks. That's in everyone's interests. Improve vehicle maintenance that prevents breakdowns and also reduces vehicle operating costs, and taking care of drivers, developing driver skills, promoting defensive driving. Also very, very important for, well, the quality of life of drivers, but also road safety. And so, yeah, as I say, one of the biggest objectives of the RTMS is to reduce crashes. I think that's it, Oliver. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Paul, for the background and providing some of the benefits of what we have seen over the years. There are no questions in the chat, so I guess we'll take them at the end of the session. So thanks, Paul. We'll talk to you in a bit. I'm just going to share my screen now and go on to our next session for the day. What I'd like to do, I can't seem to find it now. Oh, there we go. Okay, well, in my next session, what I'd like to do is just look at the RTMS requirements in a bit more detail. Especially, I looked at the number of delegates, and I think a large number of the folk on today's session are not RTMS certified. So I hope you'll find it valuable in terms of understanding what the requirements are and how does one go about addressing these. As Paul mentioned, RTMS is a South African national standard. It's the only standard that prescribes requirements for amongst consignors and consignees for commercial fleets. And the standard itself is written by the SABS TC241. In fact, we had a meeting yesterday, which Paul chaired, and we spoke about the 5-year revision and a few other things. So the content of the standard is collectively decided on by various industry stakeholders and some government representatives as well. So the 4 core pillars of the standard is around loading control, safety of the vehicles itself, which is, as Paul alluded to, absolutely critical. Equally important is the operation of those vehicles to not just comply with the regulations, but to also ensure that they're complying with best practices to minimize the likelihood of crashes and collisions. Driver wellness, I think it's an area which we have largely marginalized in terms of driver medicals, chronic illnesses, and how these impact on the driver's ability to deliver the service that we expect of these men and women on the roads, and of course training. And I think if you look at any business standard or any business model, training of the people is critical for the success of the model. So training of drivers and training of loading staff, training of fleet controllers, etc., is a crucial component to deliver on the safety and efficiency gains of the standard. So just a note on the fundamental basis of the RTMS and of any other management system standard. Standards like ISO 9001, ISO 14000, ISO 45000, etc. So all these standards are based on the concept of self-regulation. In other words, instead of having a regulator or a law enforcement agency define and control how you do business, the company uses a standard. It employs the plan, do, check, act methodology, which essentially advocates a very structured approach of how to manage your business, and in our case, how to manage your transport business. So the plan would involve developing policies, procedures, and various processes, controls, and records that would enable your team to put in place a structured approach to managing the transport business. The do would require that the planned interventions are implemented consistently and effectively. Often we find in the audits that the company might have a very well-defined policy on overloading, for example, but the consistency of the policy is not implemented as is required. So implementation and the consistency is crucial. The checking component is essential. There's the old adage that says you cannot improve what you don't measure. So measuring your KPIs, measuring fuel consumption, measuring your speed violations, measuring overloading, all these are indicators of one's safety performance. And through measurement, you will then identify any high-risk behaviors or practices, and then you take action to mitigate these identified risks. And of course, it's cyclical, hey, especially in the business world we're living in currently. Things change at lightning speed. So this whole methodology is about how quickly does one adapt to change in a changing environment, changing client demands, new environmental regulations. All these changes need to be quickly adopted, amended, adjusted and incorporated into one's business processes. Those are the 13 elements of the current version of the RTMS standard. So each of those elements or clauses specify specific requirements that one would need to address. And it's not purely about prescriptive requirements being addressed. One should look at how can these requirements add value to your business? How are you building in sustainable practices? How are you building a foundation so your business can be scalable? So if you've got 2 trucks now, can your systems allow you to scale up to 20 trucks and still support the growth, etc.? So yes, it's a standard that requires a certificate, and sometimes people just need the certificate to tender for new work. But certainly one needs to be, I think, quite forward thinking and adopt these requirements, not just for a certificate, but rather to build in sustainable practices that will allow the business to grow and also allow your brand to deliver on your client requirements. I'm going to touch on just a few key areas in the standard. Because of the nature of today's session, I can't go into much detail into every clause, but I'll certainly touch on the main requirements and the framework of the standard. So RTMS certification is issued per site or per contract or per depot. And you can decide if you've got 10 sites in the country to start on 1, cut your teeth there, and then expand as required. Part of the standard requires for one to have a defined fleet inventory or a list of vehicles or an asset register, which will indicate for the site that certification is being applied to which vehicles, trucks and trailers would comprise the fleet. So there are some various fairly obvious requirements. So one would need to ensure there's adequate control of vehicle licenses or permits, and to ensure these are valid and renewed on time. The CRWs are renewed on time, etc. Currently, the standard does allow some discretion in terms of if you have subcontractors and owner drivers in your business model, you decide if you want to include them within your RTMS certification. So I should say, most times people think of a standard, they think of a highly prescriptive approach. That might be true to an extent, but with the RTMS and all the other management system standards, it doesn't prescribe exactly your system, what your system should look like. What it does is say, this is what you ought to have in place, and you decide how your business will then incorporate that based on your context. So it's important to remember, it's not a prescriptive standard, but it's a management system saying these are the requirements, but you decide how you embrace them in context of your operations and in context of your overall business model, I think. Loading control is another key requirement of the RTMS standard for obvious reasons, to prevent damage to the road network, and a truck that's overloaded is a different animal to one that's legally loaded. Impact on braking efficiency, impact on the tires, driver's ability to control. So all of these factors are the reason why loading control is essential. So here the RTMS requires for one to have a defined loading method per commodity type. And your loading method must indicate or make provision to show how does one comply with the gross combination mass limits, and how do you make provision for the axle masses to be complied with. And that essentially means you have to, in your loading method, make provision for equal load distribution across the number of axles in your rig. So typically, if you are in the bulk transport sector, you need to have weighbridge slips for each trip that is done, and these would the tonnages will need to be recorded in some kind of a spreadsheet like that, and from there an analysis would need to be done. Oh, it's not there. Sorry, an analysis would need to be done that will indicate what is your percentage overloads per month. So these percentage overloads will record the number of trips overloaded, not the tonnages. So if you've done 10 trips for the month, how many of those have been overloaded, regardless of if the overload's been 100 kilos or 1,000 kilos. So the overloading percentage for RTMS is based on the number of trips overloaded. In talking about loading, there are various industry-specific requirements. So, for example, if you are in the abnormal load sector, if you're loading yellow equipment, or if you are loading cars, these are very unique subsectors in the abnormal loads. One could also think of dangerous goods loading that might have specific loading requirements. So depending on what you're loading, you need to ensure your method makes adequate provision for not just, well, for compliance with the mass limits, but also for load securement to avoid or prevent load dislodgement during travel. I mean, I think every day we see instances where loads are dangerously unsecured. The other day I was traveling on the N1 going to the airport, and there was a truck in front of me with these concrete pipes. And yeah, I just stayed away as far as possible because they had two ratchets that were quite small, and I just didn't think it looked safe at all. But that's not uncommon, I think. If we look around, there's a fair number of vehicles, trucks rather, that the load securement is very questionable. The other major requirement in the standard is around road safety. And one of the components of this requirement is the need to travel at a safe speed. Bearing in mind that over the last number of years, and even currently, traveling at an unsafe speed is a leading contributor to crashes worldwide. So it's a given that unsafe speeds contribute to crashes. In this regard, the RTMS standard requires for there to be a speed policy or procedure, and the policy or procedure must make provision for driving at a safe speed. And this is different from driving at the relevant road speed limit, right? So the road speed might allow one to travel at 80 kilometers per hour, but if it's a high traffic density, if the weather conditions are poor, wet roads or misty conditions, then the driver will need to contextualize the speed at which he's driving at. So the standard promotes the concept of safe speeds, and one would need to incorporate that into the policy and into the training and the monitoring, etc. So you need to have a method of monitoring all speed violations, detecting these, and then taking action where there are recurring instances of bad behaviors on the roads. And the consequence management for speed violations and other RTMS issues is not just about discipline the driver. It's how do you counsel, how do you educate, how do you inform them? And in order to achieve meaningful culture change and to promote safe culture in the business, it's not only hitting the driver on the knuckle, but it's rather providing the environment in which the safe culture can be prioritized within the operation in order to make it sustainable and not something that needs constant effort and energy. That's typically what the auditor will look at when he or she comes on site. They will request raw data for the various RTMS requirements, and in this case, the speed data to confirm what are the actual speeds that the vehicles are traveling on. The auditor will typically take a sample of trucks over a specific time period and request the data for the sample. And the same sampling approach is applied to overloading, to driver fatigue, to driver training, etc. So it's a sample of trucks, sample of drivers over a defined period, and that is really what is looked at to validate and to confirm that the policies and procedures required by the standard are being implemented effectively. The other requirement in the RTMS standard is for there to be a structured approach to accident investigation and analysis. So if you have a fender bender or a major crash, it's not just about doing the insurance claim and forgetting about it. It's about recording what was the root cause or possible root causes and keeping that data as a reference point and using it for retraining, using it to share with the other drivers so that that experience is not just a once-off event, but it can be used to mitigate future potential such instances as well. And here the standard looks at isolating the incidents to, was it a human factor, was it technical, could it have been weather conditions? So if you know, if there's a trend in terms of what are the major root causes, you have a lot better handle of how to deal with it from a management perspective. So that's just another example of accident investigation, root cause determination. The same concept is required for traffic fines or traffic infringements. Here one would need to keep a record of all traffic fines issued to the business, categorize the nature of the offences, possibly the drivers, and then take actions accordingly to mitigate recurring offences being incurred. This is especially significant now in the light of the recent RTO decision where the Department of Transport and RTIA have indicated it will go ahead, even though it has been delayed now recently, last week, due to the, I think, lack of sufficient resources. But RTO, from what we hear, even last week at the webinar hosted by SABOA, presented by RTIA, they have indicated a clear plan that it will go ahead, subject to phase 1, phase 2, etc. And in this, with the RTO demerit point system, the potential danger is if there are drivers who are highly non-compliant, their licenses may be suspended once they hit the 15-point threshold. And for every point above 15, it will incur a 3-month suspension on the driver's license. So as an operator, if the demerit point is accrued to the vehicle, so the vehicle or the operator disc could likely be suspended as well if the vehicle accrues more than 15 demerit points. So the need to keep a very close handle on traffic infringements is further heightened by the pending RTO or demerit point system regulations. The RTMS standard is quite prescriptive around the need for a structured vehicle maintenance program. The program must make provision for implementing the OEM specified service intervals, and that example shows a typical example where a company will keep a track of the date of the last service, what is the interval, when is the next service due, etc. And for the audit, the auditor will look at, yes, the service schedule, but they will also request evidence that there are service records to confirm that the relevant OEM interval has been complied with. And there you'd keep a job card, or in the case of a trailer, that kind of a record, which if it's done in-house would suffice. For trailers, if they are dedicated with the trucks, then it's fine. You can have one system, but often trailers are swapped around. And if you do swap trailers around, you need to have perhaps a time-based interval that one is using for the trailers, but you need to keep record for your trucks and your trailing equipment as well. Tire management is another key requirement in the RTMS standard, and that's just a very basic example of how a company would keep a track of each tire. What is the recommended pressure? What is the actual pressure during the survey? What is the tread depth, etc. It is required, and because tires are another leading cause of incidents, and tires, as I think Paul mentioned, the tire management has a key role in fuel consumption. So tires that are underinflated can impact rolling resistance, which influences negatively your fuel consumption. So it's not just about the safety gain, it's about having tires managed to also achieve the economic benefits of good tire management practices. So here sorry, if I could ask you to please mute, I'm not sure who that is. Ramadi, if you could please mute your machine.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so in addition to in addition to the tire surveys, one should also keep evidence of scrap analysis, etc. So these are all part of a tire management program, which is required by the standard. The need for a vehicle pre-trip inspection is a requirement of the National Road Traffic Act, but again, it's a tool that one should use to ensure that a vehicle which is not safe is not allowed to depart onto a public road. The auditor will again look at a sample of pre-trip inspections to validate that the vehicles have been authorized for release, and if there were any safety critical defects, that these ought to have been dealt with prior to the vehicle being dispatched. Driver wellness, the standard requires annual medical fitness certificates to be available, and if there are drivers who have been diagnosed with chronic illnesses, they ought to have a specific program in place to show how they're being managed because of the higher risk they present on the roads. So are they taking the medication? Are you providing them with information to manage their illness? Is there evidence that they could be needing more frequent clinic visits perhaps? So all of those tools will be required to manage the higher risk drivers with chronic illnesses. Fatigue management, the inadequate driver fatigue or lack of adequate driver fatigue management can cause major crashes and collisions. And from what we hear daily, that there are large increase in incidents, single vehicle incidents where a truck goes off route, and that one of the causes could likely be the driver slept at the wheel because he hasn't had sufficient rest. So here the RTMS standard looks at, is there a shift schedule in place? Does the company have a rest day allocation process? And are they also monitoring driving hours specifically for long haul vehicles? Driver competence or driver training. Here there's a requirement for there to be planned training interventions or training plan, and all the key areas ought to be addressed in the training plan. And I should say it's not intended to be an academic classroom-based initiative, which often can be not that impactful in bringing about the desired change in driving behavior. So the classroom training is obviously a good thing, but it's more than that. It's about how do you practically do the in-cab assessments? Do you use videos? Are you using information brochures? Are the fleet controllers talking to the drivers? At the briefing and debriefing, are the drivers constantly being asked questions that promote the safe driving methodology? If the driver is exceeding the speed limit, are they being spoken to? If there's overloading, is it constantly being addressed with the driver? So the driver training component of RTMS, it's not academic. A part of it might be, but it's more about achieving the desired end result, which is better drivers, safer drivers on the roads. Okay, that's just a video, which I'm not sure if it will play. The driver that's fallen asleep at the wheel. Another one which I'll skip. So the driver training should also incorporate how does the driver minimize the likelihood of fatigue. I'm going to skip these slides through quickly because of time. Then the audits will need to have various documents and records in place to demonstrate how one is complying with the various requirements. And there's a requirement for a quarterly quantitative KPI to be submitted on your RTMS performance. Things like your overloading percentage, your crash rates, number of traffic fines, number of speeding violations, etc. And this is not intended to catch an operator out, but rather just to provide the comfort that the RTMS system is delivering on the safety performance outcomes. And if there are, you might have a bad month. You might have suddenly a few drivers that misbehave for one reason or another. It's not fine, but I mean, it's not a train smash. You'll identify that as a high risk. You'll raise a non-conformance. You'll deal with it so that you bring down the behavior into the defined parameters that are required. So the RTMS or any other standard cannot expect 100% compliance all the time. But certainly where there are anomalies or negative trends, it's essential these are detected and actions taken to mitigate. So in conclusion, those icons summarize the key requirements of the standard. And hopefully, I think those of you who are new to RTMS will look at embracing the standard or the principles of the standard in promoting safer trucks, safer drivers on the roads. Okay, that's my slot, I think, done. Oh, there's a video. Let's see if it will play. Let me give it a start. Oops, wrong button. Sorry. My apologies. There we go.
Oliver, can you hear me? There doesn't seem to be any sound.
Oh, my apologies for that. I'll give it one more try. If it doesn't work, we'll skip it. Thanks, Paul.
RTMS is a national standard promoting safety, compliance, and efficiency in fleet operations.
Okay,
it promotes a framework in order to minimize crashes, ensure vehicle safety, promote safe driving behavior, and ultimately allow for an efficient supply chain, which is essential for economic growth and global competitiveness. Let's look at the 4 pillars of the RTMS standard. 1. Correct vehicle loading is essential, making sure that the mass and dimensions limits of the National Road Traffic Act are complied with. If a truck is overloaded, it not only damages our roads, but it is also a safety risk, as the vehicle braking and handling is compromised. Our roads are a national asset, so by preventing overloads, we preserve our roads and make them safer. So whatever you are loading, be it bulk or break bulk, make sure to load correctly and safely, taking care to distribute the load across all axles. The RTMS standard also requires safe load securement, so make sure that load is correctly and tightly secured to avoid dislodgement during transit. 2. Safety of vehicles. The second pillar of the RTMS is safety and safe operation of the vehicles. A structured preventative maintenance program is essential. This includes tire management and maintenance of the trailers. Of course, in addition to preventative maintenance, it is essential that pre-trip safety inspection is conducted daily. It is widely accepted that more than 80% of crashes are due to driver error, so managing driver behavior is a crucial requirement of the RTMS standard. One of the main causes of crashes is driving at unsafe speeds, so monitoring of driving speed is a key requirement of the RTMS. 3. Driver health and wellness. The third pillar of the standard is driver health and wellness, which requires that the drivers are assessed for fitness to drive. The standard also requires a fatigue management plan, including a driver duty roster, monitoring of duty hours and driving hours. It is critical that drivers get enough sleep to avoid falling asleep at the wheel. Another wellness requirement is the screening of drivers for possible intoxication, which we know prevents a severe risk impact. 4. Driver training. The fourth pillar of the RTMS standard is the requirement for a structured driver training program to be in place. The training program should focus on key criteria, including defensive driving techniques such as keeping a safe following distance, driving at a safe speed, avoid using a cell phone while driving, driver health and wellness. So, as can be seen, RTMS is all about managing risk and promoting safety in a fleet operation. The RTMS has been implemented by leading transport companies since 2006 and is widely accepted as the gold standard for fleet operators. JC auditors are proud to have conducted RTMS audits since 2006.
Okay, thanks. I hope that's given you a good idea of the standard. I'm going to now hand over to Paul for the PBS slot. Paul, I think you could perhaps, I think I went over my time slot, apologies for that. You could perhaps cover the pilot project and the update in one go. Would that be okay, Paul?
You mean the application? Well, I'm planning on doing the the theory of PBS and the pilot project, and then there's another presentation on the application process, which is fairly quick. Okay,
I think if you could do this together, if you don't mind, I'll just...
All of them?
Yeah. Would it be okay? Sorry to put you on the spot. It's
100%.
I just want to make sure we have at least 15 minutes at the end for Q&A.
Okay, and so, okay, that's 100%.
Okay, so Paul's going to now start with the PBS pilot project. RTMS is a prerequisite to be allowed to participate in the PBS pilot project, which Paul will tell us all about in a minute. Thanks, Paul.
Just let me know once you can see my screen.
We can see it, Paul. It's just not maximized. Okay, now it is. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So this now is about the the performance-based standards project, which has been run as a pilot project since 2007, and I'm just going to give you some of the background behind what this PBS approach is about. So now hopefully this will play, but research has shown that heavy vehicles are often not very stable. So here you can see the speed of the truck is 29 miles per hour. It's not very fast, and yet it rolls over. And research in the United States in the 70s was looking at what was the cause of these rollovers. 10,000 rollovers they were having in the States in the 70s, truck rollovers, and the Federal Highway Administration commissioned the University of Michigan to do research into this. So here's a clip from Pinetown about 3 years ago. He's going too fast, but this is typically what happens. And a lot of it is to do with the center of gravity height of the payload, but there's a lot of other things on a truck that one can change or modify that improves the stability, high-speed stability of a vehicle. And these things are not controlled by the regulations. So the prescriptive regulations, which is our National Road Traffic Act, is contained in the National Road Traffic Act, is aimed at ensuring that vehicles on the road are safe and they don't do undue damage to the infrastructure. So you've got axle load limits, you've got dimensional limits, you've got a whole lot of regulations for vehicles, including heavy vehicles. But the reality, and which is the research showed, is that despite the prescriptive regulation in virtually all countries around the world, a lot of heavy vehicles are not acceptably safe. Some are not, and some are. And what are the reasons for some heavy vehicles being dynamically unstable or taking up a lot of space when they go around a corner? So that's the one side. And the other side is the infrastructure. We allow single tires, an axle with single tires going up to 8 tons, and an axle with dual tires is allowed to go up to 9 tons. The single tires do a lot more road wear, even though the prescriptive regulation allows quite high loads on axles with single tires. So we can greatly reduce the road wear impact of heavy vehicles by having dual tires instead of single tires. And this is particularly the case for these so-called PBS vehicles. So the pilot project, when we started with the committee in 2004, there were only 3 other countries that were looking into this performance-based standards approach for heavy vehicles. PBS has been used in a lot of sectors: agriculture, road construction, health, etc. But this was started originally in Canada and New Zealand, and then subsequently Australia. So we decided, South Africa was the 4th country, decided to start a pilot project, and we would monitor the PBS vehicles and the baseline vehicles to determine what's the impact in terms of reducing road wear, reducing congestion, improving safety performance, improving productivity, reducing emissions. And then we've also, you can realize that if you've got less trucks on the road, you're going to reduce queuing times at mines and power stations, etc., and also the cross-border delays, which are so prevalent at the moment at some border posts. A lot of work has been done on this PBS approach for what we call high-capacity vehicles or high-capacity transport. And I've been involved in quite a few of these studies, looking at how we can, towards efficient, safe, sustainable road freight, policies to extend the life of road assets, etc. So we developed a strategy in 2007 for this pilot project, and there's a rules document that has been developed over the years. We're currently working on version 35, which has all the rules of how one would participate in the pilot project. The evaluation report was submitted to the National DOT in October 2020. Nothing happened for 3.5 years. But more recently, last year, there's been a lot of interaction between the review panel, PBS review panel, and the DOT, and I'll update you just now about what's happening. The safety standards are based on the Australian National Heavy Vehicle Regulator performance-based standard scheme, with some minor modifications for South African conditions. And essentially, what the PBS approach is to look at, rather than defining what a vehicle looks like, is to say, how does it perform on the road? And so there's certain standard maneuvers, which you can see on the left-hand column. Those are standard maneuvers that have been developed by a lot of research, and then certain parameters are measured while the vehicle is doing those maneuvers. And those are the performance standards. That's on the right-hand side. Now, there are 20 performance standards, including the infrastructure performance standards, and those are what you see on the screen there. So there's low speed. There's a low speed turn that measures certain things. There's a high speed lane change. There's a rollover test. There's a pulse steer, etc. And then there's drivability standards, which look at the truck engine to make sure that it's got sufficient power and torque to pull the proposed load at acceptable speeds. So here's a little clip showing, this is from Australia, showing 5 trucks doing a 90-degree turn and looking at the low-speed off-tracking. So this is the first one, is a truck tractor semi-trailer, and you can see the off-tracking as it does this 90-degree turn at the performance standard is 5 kilometers an hour. This one now is a 19-meter standard truck, and you can see how the off-tracking increases. The third one is a 20-meter PBS vehicle, and it's been designed to have a maximum swept path. It's got an additional articulation point, and you can see it performs just about the same as the first vehicle. This is a prescriptive vehicle. It's 25 meters. It's allowed in Australia. But the second trailer has got a very long wheelbase, so you can see how much it cuts in to the opposing lane. And then the last one is a 26-meter A-double. It's a PBS vehicle. and again, it's got very good off-tracking performance. So you can see here that the length of the vehicle is not necessarily related to the off-tracking. And that exactly describes how the PBS approach works. We're not too concerned about the dimensions and what the vehicle looks like, but how it actually performs on the road. Now, this is a slow speed standard. The next one is a high speed standard, high speed transient off tracking. The one on the left is a baseline vehicle, and the one on the right is the PBS vehicle. And the baseline vehicle, this is for a timber rigid truck with a drawbar trailer. The rigid truck, the baseline vehicle failed this performance standard by quite a long margin. It was not stable, mainly because of the hitch position, whereas the PBS vehicle, which is 27 meters long, 67.5 tons, so it's a high capacity vehicle, it passes this performance standard. As I say, the main change was the hitch position, but also stiffer suspension on the truck, and a few other things which are features that you can play around with on a vehicle to make it perform more safely. This was some testing. So most of these performance standards are done with computer simulation, but it's important to validate your computer simulation with field testing. And this was done at Eurotech in November 22. And this is a high-speed lane change maneuver. The truck side tipper with bladders in it. And you can see that's not even going at 88 kilometers an hour. I think that's only 60. Once you get up to over 80, this is quite a severe maneuver that's quite difficult for a driver to do. And there's the cones are set so that you get the exact offset for the lane change. Here's a simulation of a baseline vehicle, the blue one, of a rollover. That's static. We call it static rollover threshold. So it's a constant radius curve, and you accelerate the truck on that curve. As you accelerate, the lateral force increases, lateral acceleration, until the truck or one of the trailers rolls over, and you measure that force, and that's got to be greater than a certain minimum amount. So the red one is a 30-meter PBS vehicle, a A-double, 83 tons more or less, and the blue one is the baseline vehicle. And you can see as the speed increases, the baseline vehicle rolls over at 0.27 G, which is failure. The minimum requirement for this performance standard is 0.35 G. So the truck cannot roll over until it reaches at least 0.35 G lateral acceleration. And that's the performance standard. So this is not kind of Mickey Mouse stuff. It's pretty complicated computer software that does this. You model the suspension, the tires, the payload, everything. And then you actually look at how the vehicle performs. Here's a same test. You can measure this rollover test with a tilt table. And this was also Eurotech. And you tilt the table until the truck rolls over. Well, it doesn't roll over because there are chains that keep it, but you can use a digital level to measure that angle, and that can be converted to static rollover threshold in terms of 3G, in terms of G, and this has got to be a minimum of 19.5 degrees, I think, and then it passes. So for the infrastructure performance standards, we use South African technology or design codes. For the pavements or the roads, we use South African methodology, and same for the bridges. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but this graph shows what we call load equivalency factor per ton of payload. The blue diamonds represent, these are all mining site tippers. The blue diamonds represent baseline vehicles, and you can see some of them have got quite a high road damage effect per ton of payload. The red squares are all PBS vehicles, and it basically shows that we can, and particularly using dual tires, you can maintain a low level of road wear irrespective of the combination mass of the vehicle. And there's one there, the Unitrans BAB Quad, which is 185 tons, a road train. It's also got a very low road damage effect per ton of payload. But those ones that are very high are side tippers with single tires, and those axles are running at 8 tons, so they have a much higher roadway effect. Sometimes a traffic impact assessment is required by the road authority for a particular intersection or more. It's normally what we call the first mile or the last mile, to make sure that that particular combination can negotiate the curve on the route, on the proposed route. And you normally use a consultant who, in this case, he uses drones to get the exact layout of the road, and then simulates the vehicle going through the intersections to see that it can safely get through. So for this project we call PBS, but actually it's high capacity transport or high capacity vehicles. Research globally has shown that the bigger the vehicle, you reduce fuel consumption, liters per ton kilometers, you reduce emissions, you have fewer trucks on the road. So there's a lot of benefits. So the one way of ensuring safety is to say these vehicles must comply with the performance-based standards. So that ensures safe high-speed performance, adequate maneuverability, slow speed, and it ensures the vehicle infrastructure match. So for shorter PBS vehicles, they're normally allowed to go on virtually any route. They still have to indicate the routes that they're going to operate on. But for the longer ones, say up to 30 meters, they're much more restricted in terms of what routes. So the longer PBS vehicles are more suited for what we call primary distribution. So from the factory to a distribution center, those would be trucks that are operating on the same route day in and day out, transporting the load. And then your secondary distribution would be the smaller trucks going into the city center or all over the place. So PBS is not for all operations. It's specific for certain operations which allow for these longer vehicles on the routes. And so it's all about matching the vehicle with the route. And then the other pillar, which I think hopefully we've demonstrated this morning, is to ensure professional and compliant operators, well-maintained vehicles, competent drivers that are running these high-capacity vehicles. And that's why when we started the project, we said that RTMS certification will be a prerequisite for operators that want to run these high-capacity vehicles. We have to ensure that these vehicles that are going up to 90 tons are properly maintained, the brakes are working, the tires are in good condition, and otherwise you're looking for serious crashes. We've just now updated the PBS pilot project evaluation report. The CSIR submitted it to the National Department of Transport just on Monday, and I was assisting now since the beginning of January to update the report. The original report was submitted in October 2020, as I mentioned, and unfortunately the National DOT did not respond for 3.5 years. There was nothing. The provinces were getting impatient and saying, you know, this pilot project's been going on too long, and some have actually now stopped issuing new concept approvals. So, for example, Northwest, as far as I know, Northwest, Free State, and Mpumalanga are saying they're not going to consider new approvals. And so last year, some of the RTMS directors got involved in engaging with the Minister of Transport to say something. We need to act on this report. We need to make a decision on PBS in South Africa. It can't carry on like this. You can imagine some of the operators needed to replace their trucks, and they couldn't get the same model that they had before, so they needed new concept approvals, and some provinces not giving concept. It just became a big total mess, costing the industry, well, we've estimated more than 100 million since September last year, because some provinces have said they're not going to issue. Anyway, as at the end of December last year, there were about 1,400 PBS vehicles. We've got almost 500 million kilometers of data to measure those indicators that I mentioned earlier. You can see the different commodities: mining, timber, coal, heavy metal concentrate, fuel, sugar, beer, pulp, fuel. It's just there's a lot of different products that are now being moved with PBS vehicles. And the map, you can see that most of the PBS vehicles are operating on the eastern provinces, so KwaZulu-Natal, Mpumalanga, and Limpopo. A lot in the mining sector. Here you can see the growth in the number of PBS vehicles up until the end of 2023. So there are now more than 70 operators that are running PBS vehicles in the different provinces on different routes. And as I say, the first 2 vehicles went on the road in 2007. Just for interest, and I've got a slide just now that in Australia now they have over 20,000 PBS vehicles operating. I showed you this slide earlier of the fleet size for RTMS certified operators, but the dark blue bars are the PBS operators. So there are quite a few PBS operators in the SMME, the small companies, 3 of them with 1 to 5 trucks, 7 with 6 to 10, and 11 operators that have got 11 to 20 trucks in their fleet, of which some would be PBS vehicles. Just to show you a few photos in the timber industry, a lot of the PBS vehicles are not over 22 meters, such as these side tippers. They've got extra axles. They can go up to about 72 tons. They do about 30 to 40% less road wear per ton of payload. That's mainly because of the dual tires versus the single tires. This is the SA Breweries and Coca-Cola running a similar vehicle that's 30 meters long with 11 axles. We call it an A-double. Performs extremely well, even at slow speed. I'll show you a video in a minute. Some other vehicles, the fuel quad, that's a quad axle at the back. There's a biarticulated bus. You can see the biarticulated bus, the crash rate of the biarticulated buses, which are PBS buses, is 5 crashes per million. The bus trains, it's 9.1, and the rigid buses, 9.5. So there you can see quite a significant improvement in crash rates of these biarticulated buses. There's quite a long kind of, you could call it a road train now, operating in KwaZulu-Natal, and that was approved by the DOT mainly because the rail operation between Richards Bay and Sappi Saikor down the south coast of south of Durban stopped their operation. So now all that timber that was going by rail from Richards Bay to Sappi Saikor has now got to go by road, and this is a much more efficient way of transporting the timber, cost-wise, and also a lot less trucks on the road. And these were operating on the N2 between Richards Bay and Sappi Saikor. This is the first PBS vehicles in Namibia. It's a Unitrans Africa A-double as well, transporting salt from the Walvis Bay salt mine to the port, and they're saving. They've gone from, I think, 80 trips a day to 44 trips a day. So almost a 50% reduction in the trips. They're saving 532 trips a month with this combination. And this was the launch with the mayor of Walvis Bay, etc. And this is the other one in Namibia now that's transporting frozen fish. It's also been approved to transport grapes from the Orange River area in the south up to Walvis Bay, but that's would only be for a few months during the year, but during the grape season. And there's a couple of other projects that are underway in Namibia, so they are also looking at how they could introduce these high-capacity vehicles on certain routes. The Coca-Cola vehicle is operating on a number of different routes now, and they did their own investigation in terms of the potential benefits of using these vehicles. And this little video here just shows the this was the launch of their vehicle, their PBS vehicle in Bloemfontein a few years ago. It's a Volvo 610. The trailers have got steerable axles at the back to comply with the slow speed performance. So the third axle on each tridem is a steerable axle, and that makes a big difference with the turning of these longer vehicles. But just to you'll see that when it goes from the provincial road onto the N1 in Bloemfontein, you'll see how well this is a 30-meter vehicle. It's around about 83 tons, and it's quite incredible how these vehicles, when they've been designed, you see now, you can see it when it does this. So more than a 90-degree turn. So the slow speed and the high speed performance improvements are largely attributable to the improved safety performance. Okay, this is an overview now. Again, these statistics were updated just last month. So on average, with all these PBS vehicles, they're saving 31% reduction in trips. So last year, about 835,000 trips reduced, 28% reduction in kilometers. Last year, 181 million kilometers taken off the road. On average, 12% reduction in fuel. Last year, 880 million rand savings in fuel. And remember, this is now, starting the year with about 1,000 PBS vehicles or less, and ending the year with 1,400 odd vehicles. So it's a very small number of vehicles, and yet the savings are quite significant. The big savings is the reduction in crashes, 40% reduction in crashes. And the baseline vehicles in this study are all RTMS certified fleets. So we're not comparing it with any truck on the road. We're comparing it with the PBS operators are all RTMS certified. So we compare their crash statistics of their PBS vehicles with their non-PBS vehicles. But all the vehicles are managed as an RTMS certified fleet. And then on average is a 12% reduction in roadway costs. So that's now up to the end of December with, getting close to 500 million kilometers. I mentioned Australia. They've measured a 46% reduction in major crashes. The rest of this data is a bit outdated. 10,000 PBS combinations in 2019. But the more recent data is, this was August last year. And I know that by the end of last year, there were over 20,000 PBS vehicles. Just in terms of the safety performance, as I mentioned, a lot of the baseline vehicles fail some of the performance standards. And in all the projects that we've been involved in up to now, 56% of the baseline vehicles fail at least one of the performance standards. So it just shows that although the baseline vehicles are compliant in terms of the Road Traffic Act, a lot of them don't perform well if you analyze them from a performance-based perspective. But obviously, all the PBS vehicles comply with all the performance standards. And the standards that most commonly fail from a baseline vehicle point of view are the high-speed performance standards. So static rollover thresholds, rearward amplification. I showed both examples of those. And then the other one is the yaw damping coefficient. So those are the three standards that a typical baseline vehicle will fail. So really the objective is to optimize the road network so we can have larger vehicles operating on certain dedicated routes, but most importantly, ensure that these vehicles are safer at a high speed and a low speed, and also that they don't cause undue road wear to the road network. So this comes from the PBS evaluation report. after the updating, we said, we're here now, it's 2024, we need a decision one way or the other. You know, we've been going since the committee started in 2004. The first vehicles went on the road in 2007. So a lot of degrees, postgraduate degrees and papers and various work that's been done sort of from an academic point of view. A large number of papers have been published, both locally and internationally. We got to 100 million kilometers of data in 2017, and now we're waiting. If the Department of Transport says, no, we're not going to implement PBS in South Africa, we will have to develop an exit strategy, which will give time for the existing vehicles to work out their capital costs, etc., and we will have to phase them out over a period of time. If they decide to accept and adopt the PBS approach, we would have to develop an implementation strategy to say, okay, we're here now. Over the next few years, these are going to be the rules. We've already got rules, but we'd have to formalize a lot of the documents so that it can be aligned with the, changes to the legislation, etc. How long this is going to take, it's very difficult to say. But last year we had quite a lot of interaction with the department, and it seems as though now it's high on the agenda. This evaluation report needs to go to a COTO committee, which is heads of departments from all the provinces. And then from there, it has to go to a MINMEC committee meeting, which is the MECs for transport from all the provinces, chaired by the Minister of Transport. And they would then decide whether we're going to go ahead with this or not. As we know, we've got the elections at the end of May, so you know, if MECs and ministers change, we might be back to square one. So we're hoping that something will happen in the next couple of months so that we know where we stand with this project. It is costing the industry quite a bit of money, battling to get approvals, new permits for even just for the existing vehicles. So we can't really allow this to be delayed in the interests of the industry and the economy. So that's my presentation. Oliver, do you want me to go straight into this other presentation?
Yes, I think so, Paul. We've got 25 minutes odd left. So
okay.
So I think if you could do that, and we'll just do question and answers after that.
Okay. So now, all right, just give me a second.
I'm sorry for the added pressure, Paul. I'm just checking if your dynamic performance is going to be okay under these conditions.
I'm working on it. Just let me know when you can see it.
I can see it, not yet on full screen mode. Okay, there we go.
Right. Okay, this is a fairly short presentation, just to inform you of the application process. And as I said, some provinces are not considering new applications as a bit of a problem. But anyway, there's this document, the Smart Truck Rules document, which is freely available, which describes the whole process. There's a flow chart in one of the appendices, and I'm going to just go through this fairly quickly from the RTMS 6 months accreditation requirement, concept design, concept approval from the provinces. You have to do your PBS assessments. There's the safety assessment and there's the infrastructure assessment. The infrastructure assessment is done by the CSIR. Safety assessment, we've got one accredited assessor in South Africa, another one in training, and then there's assessors in Australia. We've had probably about 8 8 assessors accredited in South Africa over the last 10 years or so, but one by one they've either immigrated or moved into other industries. So we're now sitting with one, Anton Steenkamp, and there's another, as I say, there's another guy who will hopefully be accredited by the end of March. And then it goes to the review panel for approval, then manufacture the vehicle. Each vehicle that's built must be commissioned by an accredited commissioner. They go out and do some checks on dimensions, tire sizes, stabilizer bars, suspension, all the critical components that were used for the PBS assessment must be verified that they are in fact part of the vehicle. So that's the whole process of commissioning. In Australia, this is a very important part of the process. They call it certification. And then finally, you apply for your permit. So that's the list. I'm not going to go through this in detail. You have to apply for concept approval from each province. So if you're going to operate from only in, for example, KwaZulu-Natal, then you only have to apply to KwaZulu-Natal. If you're going to run from one of the mines in Mpumalanga to Richards Bay, then you've got to apply for concept approval in Mpumalanga, and you've got to apply in KwaZulu-Natal. And as you can imagine, some provinces are very quick to respond, others are very slow to respond. So it is a bit of a challenge. In that application, you need your letter, you need a valid RTMS certificate. It may not be, you may not have reached your 6 months yet, but you should have your certificate so that, and then by the time you're ready to commission the vehicles, you will have 6 months of accreditation. You need the GA drawing and then a map showing the proposed routes. Then you've got you get your concept approval letters from the relevant permit officers, and then you can go ahead with the detailed design, and then get the safety assessments done by various, either the CSR and then the accredited safety assessors. And then it goes to the PBS, the Smart Truck Review Panel for comments and what have you. And once they're happy, then that report gets a stamp on it.
Okay, we seem to have lost Paul. I'll just quickly drop him a WhatsApp. Give me a second, please. Okay, Paul, yeah, we've lost him. I think he's obviously got some kind of connectivity problems on his side, but I think he's covered the key aspects of the PBS project. We do have around just over 15 minutes left before the end of the session. Are there any questions that we need to chat around, either in terms of RTMS or PBS? Then I think we'll open the floor for questions now. Okay, Kagiso, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Naidu. I just want to know, is there any prospects of opening up the PBS into the region, like consulting with neighboring countries, especially on the corridors, to see if the trucks would be running into those countries?
Currently, I do know that NRA in Namibia, the Namibian Roads Authority, they have a very similar PBS project to ours. In fact, we worked with them. Paul is currently providing guidance to the Namibian authorities, and they have already started operating in Namibia, a pilot project. I do know that PBS vehicles run into Mozambique, and I think we've had discussions in Botswana, and Paul still has ongoing discussions there. So there are certainly indications that some of the neighboring countries are looking at it. But besides Namibia, we're not aware of any other country that has formally adopted the project. In Mozambique, as you probably know, they do not have any GCM mass limits to the trucks. They only have axle mass limits. So you could potentially run a vehicle with as many axles as is technically possible, as long as you comply with the axle limits. There's also other initiatives. There's a tripartite initiative that's looking at harmonizing regulations in the SADC region, and they're talking about what they're calling green border posts to facilitate trade in the region. But all of these are currently in pilot stages, and we're hoping that it will also promote more efficiency in the region as well. So I hope that does provide some answer to your question, Kagisa.
Yes, it did, Naidi. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, okay. So we've had, I think, Paul and I have obviously done a reasonably good job of the presentations, and there's no areas that need further clarity. So if there are no other questions or comments, I think we can certainly conclude the session. But if you have any other information you'd like, please drop us an email. We will gladly share with you, even on the pending, on Jan. Jan, please go for it.
Yes, sorry, I had some bit of issues. If it's possible that presentation can be mailed to us.
Yes, we will have the PDF versions of all the presentations sent through to you, Jan, with pleasure. We do have an email address, so we should be able to get it to you.
Yeah, please, that will be.
Yes, we will gladly do that to all the delegates, in fact. But if you have any other inquiries, I'll just type in our email address in the chat now. So it's info@jcauditors.com. So any other inquiries you might have, RTMS, PBS on R2 demerits, or other road transport legislation issues, we've also got legislation experts as well that can assist with that. So if there are no other questions, we do appreciate your time joining us today. Trust that you've found the session to be meaningful, and we look forward to engaging with you in the future. Thanks very much, everybody, and have a great day further. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hi, Paul. Oh, sorry, I just saw your message now. No, don't stress, Paul. We concluded the session a minute ago. Yeah. I just covered the end of what you were saying, and then. Yeah, I think quite a bit early, but it's fine. I just summarized the end of the process after you started. Yes, no, you start. I think you did 2 slides of the application process.
Only 2 slides.
Oh, then you're back online.
Okay. All right, no problem.
Well, I can hear you now. You're back online.
Finished now.
Yes, no, we closed, I think, a minute or 2 ago.
Sorry about that, man. So you say I only got just the very okay. Well, it's fine. It's not.
But it's fine. I mean, I did make mention that if there any further information that they need, we can always chat to them later on. So it's 100% fine. Yeah, okay. But that's so that was a good webinar. I think we did cover quite a bit. Yeah. And yeah, but thanks again, Paul.
And there was I mean, there were quite a number of delegates. I think it was like over 40, wasn't it?
42.
42, yeah.
Yeah, and I only counted four of them that were RTMS certified.
Only 4.
Only 4.
Yeah, that's very good.
Yeah. So it was a good audience, I think, to understand what the principles are on that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, geez, I don't know what happened, but anyway.
No, it's fine. What's your day like going forward?
Today?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm busy marking exam papers from that bridge inspector's course. I want to try and finish marking the exam papers today.
Oh, I see. Okay. Maybe I'll call you at like just 12:05 to have a quick catch up. I want to hear about your hike.
Yeah.
Is it fine?
Yeah. You can call me anytime. I'm in the office today, and I'm just got papers to mark. So
okay.
Anytime.
I'll send you a Teams request for 10 minutes from now.
Yes.
There's 2 other folk online, so I'm not sure if they're listening in or what. But
okay.
I'll just send you another Teams request.
Send me yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, bye.
Right.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.